Hi everybody, yes, I'm Kate. I've been working in tech for 30 years and I'm currently at Tyro. We're a fintech with a full banking license, and we provide payments and banking services to small to medium Australian businesses. Now, my role at Tyro is as an engineering lead. My role today is to be the person standing between you and your lunch, so I'll try and speed it up as much as I can. So what I want to talk to you today about is how you can use social contract theory to build social contracts for the teams that you have in engineering. So how can this help you? Before we look at what a social contract is, let's talk about why you might be interested in it, why it might be relevant to you. So let's see if any of these resonate with you. As Weinberg says, it's always a people problem. So perhaps you've got a team of leaders who are competent, even talented, but they seem to be always pulling in the wrong direction, and their teams end up as collateral damage stuck in the middle. Or perhaps you've got a team that's doing fine, they're stuck in the norming phase, and you really want to help them kick off into that high performance mode. Or perhaps you have a team, and when I talk about teams here, I'm talking about not just delivery teams, but leadership teams and any other kinds of engineering teams you have in your organisation. A team who's dealing with some of our favourite characters, the squeaky wheels, the team members for whom everything is always about them, and the team has found the path of least resistance to work around them. Or the keepers of the flame. We've always done it this way, and the other members of the team don't feel that they've got the tenure or the context to challenge them on that. So how can you help them? In all these situations, one of two things is happening. Either the people involved have lost sight of the fact that they're subject to an implicit social contract, or they have different understandings of and assumptions about what that social contract is. Now, what you can do is help make the team's social contract clear and visible so it can be jointly owned by everyone. And I'm going to talk you through the process that I've been using for a few years to do that. Just let me do this so I can see my notes better. So let's just take a step back in time and look at what a social contract is. Now, it first makes its appearance with Socrates. Here's letters from prison. He didn't call it a social contract, but he was talking about that responsibility to be subject to the rules of the society that he lived within. So he was in prison facing a death penalty, and his supporters were trying to convince him to let them free him so he could continue to do his work in exile. And he said, no, I was able to be born because of the rules in this society. I was able to be educated and to work in the field I want to work in because of those rules. So I now still have to be beholden to those rules, even when it's not a win-win situation for me. Now, the idea was then picked up with philosophers John Hobbes and Jean-Jacques Rousseau in the mid-18th century, and Rousseau wrote a book called The Social Contract, and that's where the term first appeared. And he said, this act where individual persons become a people is the real foundation of society. So the basis of social contract theory is the idea that every group of people, from a team up to a nation, works under an agreed set of rules in which the whole is more important than the parts. For a nation, that takes the form of laws. For companies, for example, Netflix, the culture deck is an example of that. But for teams, it's often a lot less clear. Everybody having their own way of doing things and doing whatever they like is anarchy. Individual compromise for the greater good is at the core of social contract theory and at the very heart of functioning society. Now, Rousseau also said, the general will depends on the coming together periodically of the entire democratic body, each and every citizen, to decide collectively and with at least near unanimity how to live together. That's my emphasis there, not his. So what I'm going to talk through now is a process for doing exactly that, deciding collectively what your social contract is going to be. Now don't panic, these are the two wordiest slides by far. So a social contract is what makes individuals a team. It's all about mutual obligation and responsibility. So the team is already a team. They're already subject, they're already working under a social contract, whether they know it or not. It's just that there might be different understandings of what and why that social contract is. Now, I talked up the front about what some dysfunctions that you see are, but it can cause even more toxicity than that. Mixed understandings of what that implicit social contract are can be really destructive. If you don't have that shared understanding, it can quickly lead to judgment and exclusion within your teams. So if you've got someone who has a very strong conviction that we as a team have this way of doing it, but somebody else in the team isn't aware of that assumption, it's very easy for that first person to dismiss the other person as at best ignorant and at worst stupid. So how can you avoid this happening? So how can you make that social contract visible? Let's look at how you can do that so that your teams can set up their ways of working, including their decision making, in a way that helps all their voices to be heard. Now, these are approaches that have worked for me. You know your leaders and teams better than anyone, so take these as biscuit crumbs to find your own way through the forest. So I'll talk through how I've run social contract sessions in the past. The first step is to prepare, frame it, set the team's expectations. When you first book in the session, ask the team to start thinking about what's working well for them as a team, what's not working well. Get them to think more broadly about their previous roles within the organisation and even beyond. What works, what doesn't. Ask them to bear in mind any broader social contracts that the team is also subject to. They might be company values, engineering principles, XP practices, the Agile Manifesto, but give them that broader context because the team social contract can't override any of those. Be sensitive about the language you use. If a social contract sounds too heavy, call it a how we work agreement or something else. And of course, standard workshop practices apply. Set aside enough time. I would recommend at least 2 hours while being sensitive of their blood sugar and focus capabilities. Decide who will facilitate. If it's not going to be you, make sure it's someone that the team trusts. We'll talk a little bit more about trust later. So I run social contract sessions in 2 parts. Part 1 is how we work as a team. So that's where you get into the nitty-gritty of what the day-to-day operation of the team looks like. It can be as detailed or as general as suits the team. Structure it in a way that makes sense to the team and address it chunk by chunk. Prepare those headings ahead of time so you're not going in with a blank whiteboard or a blank piece of paper. Now for delivery teams, I find it useful to align those chunks to the ceremonies and the cadences within the team, so whether that be stand-ups, retros, planning sessions, how you do code commits, how you run your board. It can really be at any level there. And ask questions like, what's the purpose of this ceremony? Are we happy with how we're doing it currently? How do we want to do it differently? For a leadership team, you can focus on their shared responsibilities. If you focus on their individual responsibilities, then you're automatically going in there with an adversarial approach. And you want to make sure that you're setting up a solution that enables you to eliminate that friction where every meeting and every conversation has to have a winner or a loser. So if you're running one for leaders, then think about their shared responsibilities. So if you've got a delivery lead who's responsible for building the right thing and tech leads who are responsible for building the thing right, the shared responsibility is that building, is that delivery. So focus on how they as a team can make delivery more effective and then out of that will fall what their individual roles and responsibilities in that are. It's a lot less adversarial than building a roles responsibilities matrix or having an expectation session. So however you divide it up, ask questions to focus their attention. It also helps to make sure people have the same understanding of what they're agreeing to. I'm sure I don't need to tell this particular audience this stuff, but if everybody's not engaging, ask provocative questions, make some obviously stupid suggestions if necessary. If you know there's someone in the room who's disagreeing but not expressing it, call out that no. Make it safe for them to disagree. Invite the disagreement from everybody else in the room and then ask them what it will take to turn their no into a yes. If you can't resolve that disagreement, then commit as a team to trying one solution first and then revisiting it at a fixed date. And use a parking lot, of course, when things go off track, which they most likely will. So here's some examples from sessions that I've run in this first part. This is from a team where the chunks that we used were aligned with their ceremonies, and we had one of these sheets for each ceremony that they ran, and this was the one for planning. And the question to lead off the conversation was just, what's planning for? Now, our planning sessions were awful, and the complaints afterwards were always about how long they were. When answering that question as a team, what's planning for, it very quickly fell out that there were two key purposes, and they chose to divide planning into 2 sessions. But the surprising outcome was the fact that they chose to have those 2 sessions at an hour each, nearly doubling the time of planning, which I wouldn't have imagined going into it, given that that was what they were complaining about. But we then took this agreement to every planning session for the next month or so, and even though the session was nearly twice as long, it was incredibly effective and everybody bought into it. Here's another one from a different team. This shows 2 things. The first half shows exactly how ridiculously detailed you can get if it suits the team. That was the colours of the index cards on the board. The second part was one that is probably the most surprising outcome from a social contract session that I've run. And that was, Tyro follows XP practices. Traditionally, we've been nearly an entirely pairing engineering culture, but there are some teams that are moving away from that within the organisation. So there are a couple of teams that rarely pair now, and there are others who are being more flexible and pairing on a case-by-case basis. This team was pairing close to 100% of the time, and I was fully expecting this session to be one in which they stretched that and moved away from pairing. But they doubled down on it. They actually wanted to talk about what are the possible reasons for not pairing. What if we've got an uneven number of people in the team on any given day, what does the person who can't pair do? And they decided as a team that the odd person out was not going to be able to code, that they came up with a list of value-add activities that that person could do that was contributing to delivery that didn't involve writing and committing code by themselves. So the examples that they had from the session were research, support and cross-business pairing. They came up with a much larger list afterwards. But you can't go into it with a fixed idea of what's best for the team. So part 2, values and principles. Now, why don't you do this first? It can seem a little bit counterintuitive to do the nitty-gritty first and then the values, partly because if you go in first and talk about values, you'll get a much more apple pie set of responses. People will tell you what, and the rest of the team, what they think people want to hear. Whereas if you leave the values and principles part of the conversation until later, then it becomes what is, of the things we've decided to do, what values does that reflect? So given what we've agreed today, what's become apparent to us about what we hold dear and what are the underlying fundamentals of the way we work together? So here's some examples. This team, actually this was a tribe, and they wanted to group their values by the pillars of collaboration, how they build things, and culture. And one of the key highlights was don't avoid challenging tasks. This one, just note the avatars on the side. I'll talk about those later. Respect, fun, pride. The two that were really key for this team going forward from this session were communicate honestly and respect each other. We had a squeaky wheel situation in the team, and those two together, communicating honestly and respecting each other, were really powerful for that team in addressing that situation. People were no longer escalating those issues, they were talking about them face to face. This is another one for a team called Zoidberg, which is my favourite team name ever. Now, the key one here that I want to call out is we care about future Zoidberg. So that impacted their technical practices. They wanted to make sure that the code that they were committing was going to be easily maintainable by the future team members. So you've gone through the two phases of the session. You've got your ideals and values, your principles. You've got your how we work agreement. What next? Own it. And that's where those avatars come in. So when I run a session on the morning, I will give everybody an index card and get them to draw a self-portrait and write their name on it. You can use Instax, photos, whatever your preference. But it means that at the end of the session, people have to actually physically go up in front of their team members and commit to that social contract that you've agreed to. It makes their agreement obvious and kinetic. And then hang that agreement in the team area, where not only the team can see it on a daily basis, but everybody around them can see it and know that they're proud of it. But most importantly, use it. Now, as I mentioned with that planning slide, we took that into every ceremony, and that's a great way to reinforce what you've decided at that nitty-gritty level. Just bring those sheets along and talk through it briefly at the beginning of each session, really embedding those practices and making it sticky. Make it safe to hold each other accountable and demonstrate that by holding yourself accountable to that agreement as well. And then what next? So remember that periodically bit in the Rousseau quote near the beginning? That's really important. You can't just do it, dust your hands off, right, great, now go and achieve. You have to revisit it on a regular basis. Agree with the team what that regularity is and put it in your calendar so that you remember. When someone new joins the team, it's a new team. As soon as you get a new team member, it really is a new team. But it's not always the most constructive time to run through a social contract session. So what I've done in the past is have it as part of their onboarding process is to introduce them to the team social contract, make sure that they're comfortable with it, give them an opportunity to sit with it for a few days and question it if necessary. And if they are comfortable, then we have a signing ceremony as part of Stand Up in the Morning so that they're able to say to the team, I'm part of this team and I believe in what we've committed to together. Now, this is potentially powerful and exciting stuff for you to use with your teams, but I want to make sure to remind you that it's not a way to bend the team to your will. It's not a way to reach a foregone conclusion, as we saw with those examples with the pairing. It's not an opportunity for you to teach your teams about best practice agile or to manage an individual's behaviour. Now, I did mention up the front that it can be an effective way of having impact on an individual's behaviour, but really more powerful is the way it makes the team more resilient to that behaviour and able to deal with it and work with it within the team themselves. It's not a list of rules and punishments, and it shouldn't be a feel-good set of inspirational statements. When's the right time to run this session? Well, I would suggest not on day one, week one or month one. I've seen leaders come into teams and say, well, I'm here, you're doing it all wrong, let's do a social contract session. And surprise, surprise, that's never been effective. Don't do it when team happiness is low or when the team is under stress. The most important thing is that the team trusts you, that this is actually a worthwhile exercise to take them through, and that you're not doing something fluffy and time-wasting with them. When I interviewed at Tyro, one of the interviewers ended up being in my team, and I had mentioned social contracts in the interview, and every fortnight after that, he would say, "Are you going to run a social contract session? Come on, can we do it?" And they weren't ready. They might have been ready, but they didn't trust me yet. And then I came in one Monday and said, right, they're ready now. But that was as much about me and my relationship with them as it was about them. So there's no perfect time to run it, because if the team's operating perfectly, then you don't really need the benefits of the social contract. But it can be useful as the team transitions from storming to norming and all the way through to the performing stage. When the team feels they're ready to kick things up a notch, or when you feel that they're ready to really fly. So we heard from Jean-Jacques Rousseau earlier. Let's hear from some people who've been through this process. Writing and signing a social contract not only helped everyone communicate better, the process of creating it brought us closer as a team. And it enabled less vocal team members to find their voice when their more vocal teammates did something contrary to the team's values. And this one, I only wished we'd learned about them sooner, and now you have. So thank you very much. I would love to know if you've run similar sessions before, and to learn from your experiences. If you've got any questions, that's my talk to me in the break, or that's my Twitter handle there. I'd love to hear how you go if you run one of these. Thanks.
Thank you, Kate.